Welcome everyone to a different view of my very small apartment here in New York City. Over there you can see NYU. That is facing towards the East Village. I have the window open now. It's getting warmer. You may be able to hear traffic and lights screaming and drunks and pump up the jam or pump up the volume. And a lot of you were really nice to comment and ask questions to my last video. So I thought I'd see if I could answer some of your questions. Honestly, I don't think I can answer very many of them at all. But you know, I know about this sort of one area of jazz, most of which stems from my time as a drummer and a jazz drummer. And one person asked me, Stan, a video about your drumming and why you started out with jazz records, reviews, etc. would interest Stan. I can remember the first time I heard a Miles Davis record. I was cooking chicken in my mother's backyard. I was grilling, drinking wine. I was listening to Nefertiti. I was listening to Fall, and it just blew me away. Just the rolling effect of the musicians and Tony Williams' incredible soloing on that track. That's when, you know, I started out as a teenager, you know, listening to Ringo, and I played in new wave bands, and not really punk bands, but new wave bands. We wrote all our own material, and then to make money, I went on the road in the early '80s playing top 40 music, and I used to sing, and I played up and down the Eastern Seaboard from Virginia all the way down to Florida. Back when you could make a really good living as a musician playing in hotel bands, 6 nights a week. Was it 5 nights? Yeah, I pretty much just lived on the road and lived in hotel rooms, and it taught me certain things, but in a lot of ways it was an extremely unmusical experience. A lot of bad musicians, a lot of girls coming up and touching my hair because I had a big afro back then. But I knew I wanted to play jazz from the first time I heard it. And I found a really great teacher in Charlotte, where I grew up, named James Baker, who had taught at Berkeley. Amazing drummer, just an amazing, straight-ahead traditional drummer. Now he's the principal piano tuner in Charlotte, James Baker. He taught me so much, taught me how to listen. I would go to jam sessions run by a teacher in the area named Bill Hanna, where if you're from North Carolina, Charlotte, he was an institution. He died not that long ago. Everybody came to Bill Hanna. You go to his house playing his jam sessions with really amazing musicians. And you know, I was just learning and listening and learning and all the time and learning and listening. Then I came to New York in 1987 for the first time and studied at Drummers Collective with a lot of great, amazing people like Kim Plainfield and Frankie Malabé and Ricky Sebastian, Robbie Gonzalez. And I met a lot of great musicians there, including John Weber and the great Zach Danziger. He and I were pretty tight back then. I could almost hang with Zach back then. We do a lot of double drumming. But he was just such an incredible young musician, and he introduced me to Dave Weckl, and we go up to McKell's on 97th Street in Manhattan, when it was really a dangerous neighborhood, and see Dave Weckl and Joel Rosenblatt play with Michel Camilo, and I can't remember who else. It was an amazing time, and I learned so much. And I pursued jazz for like maybe 2 years, but I just really wasn't good enough, and I lost the spirit. And I was tired of lugging drums around at 4 a.m. in a cab. And it was just fierce, you know, and I just didn't have enough things really together, even though I could swing pretty well, I guess. So I digress. Nice comment from my fellow stereophile writer, Rob Shirer. I'm mispronouncing Rob's name, but great writer. I wish I had more of Rob's sort of laid-back sense of humor. Rob, I need that. Send it to me in a packet. KG O'Brien asked me, how about a video covering the earlier days of jazz with Buddy Bolden, Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, Fletcher Hendron, etc.? Now, I don't know much about that era. I think it would be interesting to interview this fellow in a Zoom call, KG O'Brien, and we would talk about that, because he really seems to know. A few points could be how jazz developed out of the blues, how soloists became more adventurous, starting with Jelly Roll, King Oliver, and eventually Louis, where he became free of the melody and soloed outside of the song. This is really important stuff. So, KG O'Brien, I'm going to send you a text, and we're going to do this thing. What about covering the brilliant Archie Shepp? I agree. I have a bunch of Archie Shepp's records. He's a major force, continues to do really great stuff. Did a record, I believe, earlier in the year or last year with his nephew, which was just great. It just blew my mind. He's got another one coming out. This is a question I can't answer from James Appleby. Ken, I'm over the pond in the UK. Wondered if you could do a top 10 of UK pressings or ones to look out for. You got me, man. I don't know. Those early Esquire pressings seem to be pretty great. A lot of those pressings have great covers. But we don't see those pressings over here very often. So I've never seen them enough to even know what the UK pressings are really about. Howard Jones, what about doing a review of jazz artists who successfully crossed over into other genres? That's like a 5-minute video. You know, Herbie Hancock, crossed over with Rocket and all that stuff. Chuck Mangione, who gets kind of, you know, trashed. Chuck Mangione is a great trumpet player. He had great bands. He just happened to make a record that became popular doing that track Feels Good to Me. That was a huge hit in the 70s, late 70s. But that guy can play his ass off. He's got a record out, a really early record with Steve Gadd on drums. They do a version of High Heel Sneakers that is off the chain. And he did a bunch of really great records. He was maligned a little bit because he had hits. Hey, that's great. You know, Dave Brubeck had hits. We need more jazz people to cross over. And I mean jazz people, not, you know, shite like Kenny G. I mean actual jazz people. Because back in the day, you know, jazz music was dance music. It was the most popular music in America. Western Artifact says, please talk more about God's piano player, Richard T. You know, that's another, you know, of groups who crossed over, maybe should have crossed over. You know, the group with Richard T. and Cornell Dupree and Steve Gadd. I forgot who the bass player was. Stuff. What a groove monster of a machine that band was. And I still, the recordings are out there, and it's just, you know, just the beauty of being in the pocket. Richard T. was like a lot of guys back then in the 70s, could play a lot of different music, but I still think of him as essentially a gospel piano player. But I'm sure he could, you know, play jazz and swing his butt off. But he was a monster of a player. If you want to hear pure, undiluted, great feeling jazz funk grooves with more of kind of, to me, a gospel tinge, check out Richard T's albums or any of those Stuff albums, which are really easy to find and cheap as dirt. Frank Vieira says, why does CTI Records always get knocked down by hardcore jazz guys? I love those records more than the hard bop stuff. Well, that's just a matter of taste, obviously. I'm more of a fan of spiritual jazz and funk fusion from the 60s and the 70s. Okay, well, that's yet different kind of music. CTI is not spiritual jazz of the 60s and 70s. It's not. CTI was recorded to be, those records are great, don't get me wrong. I love those Bob James records. I love almost anything on CTI. I have these two records of Mark Colby. Those things are amazing records. They're funky, but they're processed records, and they're meant to be commercial. Nothing wrong with that. Those are Grover Washington, another guy who crossed over and became very popular, was on CTI, but that's got nothing to do with spiritual jazz. I'm glad Tone Poet reissued many of these hard pop jazz albums. I can fish these out on Spotify before I buy them. Your videos are very, very helpful. Thank you very much. Fishing out the hard bop. Just like I think you can buy anything on the label Kudu or Muse, which were 70s and 80s labels, I believe, respectively. Really, you can buy just about anything on CTI, and it's going to be a kick-ass record in the pocket, great musicianship. And there's so much of it, from Diodato to the Bob James records to the George Benson records. There's a lot of it, and they're really solid, and they haven't been heavily reissued. I could be wrong, but nobody has really jumped on those. I don't know who owns that stuff now, but those are brilliant albums. You know, at Jazz Record Center, we don't see them that often. And people do kind of, I don't think they malign CTI. Certainly the hip hop guys don't malign. That stuff's been sampled so heavily. But really anything on CTI is pretty great. I recommend all those records. And they're cheap because it's a label that hasn't been reissued to death. They only made one record video, Walter Benton, Don Sleep, Marcy Lutz. Oh, jeez. You know, to me, generally speaking, if they only made one record, there's a reason they only made one record, even though the Walter Benton record is great. The Tyrone Washington record on Blue Note is great. That's a great record. Kind of shocking when I really listened to it. Tina Brooks recorded more than one record, but they put one record out. Talk about a guy who was criminally robbed by Blue Note. It's Tina Brooks. He wrote, I think, all the material that appears on Freddie Hubbard's Open Sesame record. He was a wonderful alto player, I think. His records, you know, True Blue, I forgot the other one, are brilliant recordings. And he got sort of maligned and died young like so many of these guys. But single records, most guys didn't record single records. Why Walter Benton only made one record is kind of a mystery. Optimal listening for mono LPs on 2-channel systems. You know, if you can find them, the Blue Note UA mono records are very hard to find. You can find Prestige OJCs that are mono. Everybody wants mono now, because mono, I think you will find, if you can get like an original mono pressing or even a reissued, the mono signal is in the middle and it has so much drive and energy. Some people prefer mono, some people prefer stereo. I've heard Blue Note records with both versions sound really, really good. To me, it's more a problem of finding those mono records. You know, can you find a mono Prestige of Gene Ammons or Lockjaw Davis? or Shirley Scott. These things are getting harder and harder to find, but I digress. And really any good mono reissue you can find on Prestige, Blue Note, Riverside, Savoy. You know, Savoys are going to start rising because people like myself and the great Daniel Van Elsch talk about them all the time. But you can still find those records, and they're mostly in mono, and they sound great. Top 10 in the pocket LPs. I'm not sure what that means. I guess anything by Lee Morgan, Horace Parlan. A lot of stuff on Blue Note. Sonny Clark, a lot of stuff is in the pocket. But then also, to me, in the pocket means certain of the fusion era. Anything with Steve Jordan playing drums is in the pocket. You know, he just owns a lot of that drumming, like with the Brecker Brothers albums on Arista, Detente, woo! Terry Brothers, that stuff is in the pocket. What's that song, Squish? Oh my God, that thing is just intense, you know. I think it's Hiram Bullock on guitar, might be wrong, but Steve Jordan on drums, Will Lee and the Brecker Brothers, and it's just burning. You know, the Brecker Brothers albums are very dicey. Back to back kind of sucks. Strap Hanging is really good. Heavy Metal Bebop has some really high moments on it. But some of their stuff is just, they were looking for a hit. What about shedding some light on contemporary artists currently releasing jazz on vinyl? In the US, if you're a jazz artist in New York City, by and large, these people cannot afford to press vinyl. It costs too much. When I interviewed Don Was a long time ago for Downbeat, he said, we have to be guaranteed, or maybe the publicist told me, we have to be guaranteed that we are going to be able to sell 5,000 copies of a jazz record by a new artist if we press on vinyl. So that kind of says it all right there. From the major player in jazz vinyl today is probably Blue Note. They go like 5 reissue campaigns going on. But in saying that, if you're willing to search things out, to me, you know, there's a lot of great stuff on Bandcamp. People post interesting things all the time. Chris Lightcap has done a bunch of great records. He's sort of, you know, he's one of the greatest bass players in the city. His Big Mouth and Super Big Mouth bands are really, really great. But generally, I would recommend you go to Bandcamp and just look for vinyl, jazz vinyl, because often that stuff's really collectible. Also, anything from Brownswood Recordings, Giles Peterson's label, is usually just really great. Any of the spiritual jazz collections, we're talking about old music again. But I'd go to Bandcamp and look for new stuff, because there you can listen to it as well. Hi Ken, Big Wave Surfer, new to Hi-Fi. I've been binge watching all of your videos. Oh, that's really nice. I don't know how anybody could binge watch me. Is pretty amazing, but that's really nice of you to say that. You inspired me to start acquiring some first pressing jazz recordings, mid-50s, early 60s. Problem is, they all seem to be pressed in mono. Hey! Ha! Maybe you can do a video showing how to listen to mono and stereo records? Currently, I have a stereo-only setup and can't help but wonder how much I'm missing out by not having a dedicated mono setup. Love to know how you transition between mono and stereo. I don't transition. I have a very small apartment. I have 2 turntables, but we'll put this back, Jack and clean. But I have to get ready to review things all the time. I have my Kuzma Stabi R set up all the time. I just re-put the Thorns TD-124 back into my system with a Denon Deal 103 cart. You know, I'm not made of money. I'm not Herb Reichert, you know. I don't have 1 million cartridges. Herb writes, you know, everybody knows Herb Reichert is probably the best writer stereophile at the moment, since we lost Art Dudley. And Herb, you know, can review all these things. I can't, so I can only get things that he's reviewed. I have a Koetsu Rosewood that he nicely gave me. I have a Clear Audio Concept moving cart, about $1,000. What a great cartridge that is. The Denon Deal 103. I still have the Hanna MC. If you have a reasonably good stereo setup and you have a mono pressing and everything is set up correctly in your system, if everything's in phase, if you've tried to isolate the best you can so you're not getting any extraneous resonances, you know, you're going to hear the difference between mono. If you can afford to buy old mono pressings and they're clean, make sure they're clean. Over here I have my Project cleaning machine. I love it. Over there I have the German audio system desk cleaner. Now there's more ultrasonic cleaners coming out for much cheaper. You can get the one from Kermis for $800. If your records are clean, you're going to hear the mono thing happening, even with a mono cart. I'm sure it's a lot better with a mono cart, but I'm not really sure how much you're missing. A really nice guy, Daryl Jacobs, a drummer from Sydney. Oh, he's upset because I wore the CD Sucks t-shirt. Always read your articles in magazines. Thank you. Love the one on Milford Graves. Thank you. I recently did a Milford Graves. Thank God we did that at Jazz Times, an overview of a Milford Graves exhibition they did at a place down in Philly. I buy CDs, and I saw your CD Sucks t-shirt, and another one. You said you're not even hearing the music, thought it was a bit harsh. Yeah, I am a bit harsh. I can overreact. That's part of my personality. It certainly hasn't helped me in the long run. But at the end of the day, I never listen to CDs. When I review something, even now I don't, if I have to review something, I have a CD player, it's buried down under there. I'll listen to streaming files. I'd rather hear a streaming file, a high-res file from Cobuzz or Tidal than a CD. That's just me. So me, I think CDs suck. I thought it was funny. Jeff Catalano of High Water Sound agreed. I sent him one, whatever. Tomas S. asked me about, agrees that the U.S. is the birthplace of jazz. Many of our greatest players set up camp in some of the European capitals such as Berlin, Paris, Stockholm, and Copenhagen. How about some native European jazz musicians of significance? Oh my God, that's an entire video on its own. Past and present. I actually think that the best jazz currently being made in the world is not being made in the U.S. by a large margin. It's being made in Europe. It may be being made in South Africa. It might be being made in Brazil. America, you know, is codified, and I got to get a grant. So he says, well, he's talking about the old school guys. I recommend checking out Lars Gullin, Arne Damaris, Jan Johansson. Those are the really old school guys. But like anybody on ECM, I mean, you know, Europe is leading the way. My good buddy Miguel Barrio, fave carts and matching phonographs be awesome. Again, that is Herb Records Terrain. Last one, you're spending the rest of your life on a deserted island. You can take your Kuzma, Shindo, and Devore. There is electricity, but you only take 5 records. Which ones and why? 5 records. Which ones and why? Beatles, Magical Mystery Tour. Miles Davis, Miles Ahead. Pat Metheny, Still Life Talking. John Coltrane, Black Pearls, Joker, Ballads, some Ella Fitzgerald record. Thank you everyone for watching my channel. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.